What a panel do we have for you this evening from Washington, D.C. Joining us, Bradley Bowman, Senior Director at the Center on Military and Political Power, the Foundation for Defense of Democracy, Deputy Editor for the Asia Times, David Goldman, joining us from New York and here in our Tel Aviv studios. One and only Dan Perry, International Affairs Analyst and former Europe Editor at the Associated Press. Thank you, gentlemen, so very much for joining us tonight. So let's get to it, gentlemen. Is there any hope for Chinese-U.S. relations? As always, we begin with our quick fire round.
There's hope for anything, if you're willing to wait long enough, even for Middle East peace. But right now, the issue is the situation is difficult, and the background is one of simmering tensions in a landscape of potential conflict. I think these two countries have conflicting interests, ideologies, and the issue is even more strategic than economic. And in my view, the variable is China. The U.S., the Trump administration aside, is predictable. China is not.
Ask yourself, how do you think the Beijing would respond if we had balloons floating over the entire country of China? I think we know exactly what they would do, and it'd look quite similar to what the United States did. They would shoot it out of the air. And so, this was a spy balloon from China, the first one I'm referring to, that transited our country and loitered over our intercontinental ballistic missile fields, even as China conducts what our Strategic Command has called a breathtaking modernization expansion of its own nuclear triad. So, I think the silver lining here is it underscored for your average American and middle America, if you will, the reality and tangible nature of what China has been doing for a long time. And that is conducting a comprehensive and systematic campaign to collect as much intelligence as possible in preparation for a potential conflict with the United States and the Taiwan Strait.
It seems almost designed to have delivered that message to the American public in a manner almost comical. And I have to say, I doubt China would have waited for the American balloon to float all the way across the country and over the Pacific. I suspect they would have downed it immediately, regardless of the consequences.
I think you're right. And certainly there was political pressure here in the United States along those lines that we saw manifest itself in the subsequent balloons, regardless of their origin.
Yes.
China's strategic doctrine is, in the case of war with the United States, to bombard us with their 350 hydrogen bombs propelled by ICBMs. We have no defense against that, and no amount of intelligence is going to add or subtract from the fact that our homeland is massively vulnerable. I'm an old Reagan Strategic Defense Initiative guy. I'd like to spend trillions in missile defense, but we're sitting ducks at the moment.
Can we talk about climate change together and things where we have common interests? Of course we should. Of course we should. But in the end, they want to extinguish the freedom for 25 million people in Taiwan. And if they have the power to do it, they're going to do it.
But do they want to extinguish freedom in the West? That's my question, actually. Because if they were as culturally imperialistic, as you suggest, then that would be their goal. And although I try not to be naive about the intentions of the Chinese Communist Party, I'm not sure that really is their goal.
What is China's game plan?
It's fair to say that China's goal is to achieve global primacy, displacing the U.S. and the West, maybe by the middle of the century. And, by size of economy, it's not inconceivable. They might achieve something close to that. Also, not necessarily true that they will. But, more interesting, I think, more of a challenge where we can be more skeptical is whether they can ever really project innovation as opposed to just industry replication and theft, or whether they can project soft power, the soft power of a true superpower, which requires cultural affinity of the sort that is not their forte, nor something they have necessarily desired.
Who's gaining from this recent spat? India? And speaking to that point, why isn't much of Asia too bothered, let's put it that way, about the balloon saga? Dan?
Who's gaining is whoever has an interest in not seeing the U.S. and China collaborate and continue the dynamic of globalization that we've seen over the past 4 decades. And I have to say, I think in the background here, that is a very interesting aspect of the story. One of the gifts of Vladimir Putin in invading Ukraine has been to really put a damper on people's willingness to be dependent on other countries, potentially bad faith players, the way that Western Europe has been dependent hitherto on Russian natural gas. So China's ambition to supplant the West, what makes it not ridiculous is its economic growth of recent decades. And that growth has been predicated on China becoming the factory of the world, factory of the U.S. Yeah. Europe trades with China close to $1 trillion. The U.S. imports from China, about $500 billion. It's not small. And I'm not so sure that the U.S. Will be willing to continue that kind of semi-dependency. Thankfully for the U.S., it's less strategic than dependence on energy and possible to reverse. And also, it's different than it would be if China controlled Taiwan, because that would create a hyper-dependency on a China which controls Taiwan in the realm of semiconductors. So that's the globalization story is a big part of the background here.
No leader in China, nationalist, communist, fascist, democrat, whatever, could survive the loss of Taiwan, because the national humiliation of China in the 1890s, when Japan seized it from the Qin dynasty, is something Chinese still remember. They have very long memories, and that's not something the mainland or any mainland government will tolerate. It has nothing to do with communism.
Mr. Goldman, when did the People's Republic of China begin to exist? What year?
China has existed since the Qin
dynasty. I asked you the
about
People's Republic of China. I didn't ask you China. I asked you the People's Republic of China. What year?
That's an irrelevant question, because this is a Chinese national issue, not an ideological issue. Whether it's communist or some other government, you're not going to get a separation of Taiwan without a military.
I'd love to hear the logic. So let's suppose he had said it's only existed for 70-some years. Okay, so what would be the conclusion?
The point is that the status quo is the current situation where Taiwan does not declare independence, right? And we try to resolve this conflict peacefully. That's the position of the United States. It's codified in the 1979 Taiwan Relations Act, and that this should be resolved peacefully. Beijing are the ones that are preparing to use armed force to coerce or conquer Taiwan. The People's Republic of China has never
and perhaps the way we're concluding this debate hints us at what the balloon saga is telling us about the future of U.S.-China relations. Bradley Bowman, David Goldman, and Dan Perry, thank you for a fascinating conversation. Thank you.